Today's show is sponsored by Megaport. Are you looking for an easier way to connect all your clouds that you're using? With Megaport's Network as a Service platform, you can spin up private connectivity to as many clouds as you want, anywhere in the world in minutes, not months. All the world's top cloud service providers, such as AWS, Azure, Google, are already on the network and at your fingertips. And it's all software defined, no hardware necessary. Just point, click, and connect. So if you're looking for a way to improve network performance and security, lower cloud cost, and turn up hybrid cloud and multi-cloud connections quickly and easily, Megaport is the cloud connectivity solution for you. Learn more at megaport.com. That's megaport.com. Reimagine connectivity.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Before we get into news, you might be wondering, where's all the AWS reInvent news? We're actually going to hold that. I know the show is going on this week, and it's good to see everyone out and about. It's probably the first big trade show of the year that a lot of us are experiencing either virtually or in person. So we're actually going to have our next week's show be nothing but a rundown of AWS reInvent and all of the announcements. So if you're looking for that, next week will be the week for that. In the meantime, we do have a couple of news items this week. Number one, VMware earnings. And as many know, we've followed VMware very closely, and we've often said, they're probably the last multi-billion-dollar closed source software company, because that model has really shifted in the industry. Everything is shifting to subscription and to SaaS models. And VMware actually is no different from that. They are in the process of really growing from their perpetual license business into subscription and subscription renewals as well. And as part of that, they actually delivered 25% growth in subscription and SaaS ARR, beat street estimates as well, and really we're showing some nice growth. And it's very good to see that as they continue to move forward. For our next bit of news, we're going to pull out the buzzwords here. Digital transformation. You know, a lot of us have talked about it. A lot of us have been involved in the marketing buzzword bingo games at times that is digital transformation and what it could be. But there's a really good article in Harvard Business Review that really goes through, from a more practical standpoint, what are the different stages, what are the different resources, and how can an organization go through a true digital transformation. Now, what was interesting for me in this article was people was number one. And some folks may go, well, yeah, of course it is. But they cite this as a stumbling block a lot of times in digital transformation projects. And this is certainly something I've seen many times, because the workforce, they don't necessarily reinvest in skills. They don't retool the existing people. So there's lots of money and lots of budget for software, for new tools. Go out, let's figure out how we can transform all of this. But the people need to get on board. Then they use a cell phone as an example. And actually that their cell phone example hit very close to home for me personally. My father-in-law still has a flip phone, still has, what we jokingly refer to as the dumb phone, right? The exact opposite of a smartphone. Says he's never going to buy one. And over Thanksgiving actually brought his newest flip phone, which they had to retire the old one because 3G is no longer a network anymore. They're turning down 3G network. So it was an LTE capable dumb phone. Why am I saying that? Because sometimes the people just don't want to change. And so it was nice to see this, people is number one. Then they move on to data and how are we going to be looking at data, what those insights are brought about from that data, what actions can we take, and ultimately what results are we measuring, and then how do we repeat that model for digital transformation. Again, if that is interesting to you, the link will be in the article. I really thought it was a very quick read, but very informative read as well. So go take a look. For our third article, and actually it's less of an article and more of a graphic, MIT Sloan Management Review has a graphic, and it's a quadrant, and it's very similar to kind of the Gartner Magic Quadrants, if you will. Of bottom right, in this instance, it's measuring which jobs are most vulnerable to automation. So if you're in the bottom left, it's what we call a durable job, meaning both the skills and the delivery mechanism are less likely to be automated. All the way to the top right, which they call displaced jobs, skills that may be going away or could easily be automated, and the way in which they're delivered is also going to be altered. And then they kind of went through some others as well. And the other corners is jobs that are high value, but the way it's being delivered is shifting very significantly. And they list photographer as a good, for instance, there. But disrupted jobs. Jobs that are going to be, they're highly standardized, they can be more easily automated, but yet the value is in the human connection and the delivery and less about the skill set itself. So really fascinating graphic. I learned a lot from that. I don't know if I agreed necessarily with all of them, but if you have feedback on that, certainly let us know. And with that, that's going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. Right after the break, we're going to be talking about code and a little bit about complexities and interdependencies and how to handle that throughout code lifecycle.
Today's show is brought to you by CBT Nuggets. You know how much we value ongoing education on the Cloudcast. And CBT Nuggets is exactly what Aaron and I wish we had when we were trying to get our certification early in our careers. CBT Nuggets is all about bringing a personalized touch to learning about cloud computing, virtualization, networking, DevOps, and much, much more. Whether it's their hands-on labs with personalized coaching or the online chat functions that come up with every instructor-led course, CBT Nuggets' team of experts is always there to help you get the most from your training and your path to certification. You can check it all out at cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast and sign up for a free trial. You get access to the full catalog of great training, including virtual labs, quizzes, and other premium features completely free for the first 7 days. That's cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast. And we're back, and today's show is going to be kind of fun because it's going to kind of combine two things that we always are really interested in. One is, we love to sort of look at new ways in which there are things we can do to help make application teams and developers more productive. And number two, as you know, if you've listened to the show for a while, we always love when we get a chance to talk to new and emerging and up-and-coming startups, because we've had a very long track record of getting a chance to talk to a lot of startups who've gone on to be really, really successful, not by any of our doing, but, coincidentally, we get a chance to talk to a lot of smart people in the early days. So we're going to have a chance to kind of do that today and combine the two. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Really excited to have Shanea Leven, who is founder and CEO of CodeSee. Shanea, welcome to the show. Great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to chat.
Yeah. So, CodeSee is not a completely brand new company. Sometimes we get some that are like literally brand new. You guys have been around for a couple of years now, but you've had a really interesting background, a lot of previous work at very, very interesting companies. You've been helping developers for a long time. So give us a little bit of your background and then, what ultimately led you to start CodeSee.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my background has basically been almost all exclusively in developer tools. I started a web development and social media company when I was very young. And then after that, I moved into being kind of a product analyst to kind of give information around the state of California. And then right around the same time, I stopped doing the web development thing and Google called. And I was like, Google calls and you kind of, go.
Yeah, you take that call. Right.
Right. And so I spent the first 6 months as a Red Badge contractor, go Red Badges. But then I converted over into being a full-time employee in the developer relations group. And so once I kind of got into helping developers and kind of really deeply understanding their world, I was essentially hooked. And so I worked in developer tools and develop a platform within Google for about 4.5, 5 years. And then I moved into being a product manager at eBay, where I kind of quickly went into ads a little bit, but then I went back into working on developer products for the for the machine learning and personalization price guidance team.
Nice.
And then I kind of had it with big companies. So I wanted to try the startup game, where I was at a small startup, a distributed graph database startup for a few months. And then I went to slightly larger companies. I was at Cloudflare as a direct product and then senior director product at Docker. And then I moved to be head of product at a developer-focused startup called Lab. And they're doing amazing API company for direct mail. And I started CodeSee kind of between my Docker and Lab days, where I was actually working on a feature at Docker. And the feature, we're working on it for several months. We're trying to get out the door, and 2 days before the launch, there was a bug. And the bug was coming from a code base that basically no one at Docker really understood. They weren't like, all the people who did understand it were completely gone. And there was no documentation for how that part of the code base worked. And my engineers essentially said, hey, we need a month to kind of read every single part of this code base and understand it so that we don't cause catastrophic effects to some other part of the code base. And that was really essentially devastating because we'd put so much time and effort. And honestly, it wasn't the first or the second or the third time that something like that had happened. Really large code bases. It was just the most high profile, the one that like hit me the hardest. Right. And so I kind of just yelled out in desperation, like, why do we not understand our code? And that kind of led me to really try to answer that question of, why do we not understand our code? Why? And so I then came up with, well, we need to be able to really quickly analyze the code base, get information out of it, and know the right information at the right time to be able to do our jobs better and really grasp that information. And so we visualize it. We make obviously we make pictures of what the code base looks like and how things are connected and what kind of information is related to that. So you can quickly grasp that mental model of how the code is working. You don't have to build it yourself in your head.
Yeah, no. And so your background sort of follows all these sort of trends that we've had on the show for a long time, which is fantastic. But I think what was really interesting to me when we started learning about your company was I was like, we're now in this time. I've been on product teams. I've sort of lived through the thing that you lived through, which was either those people that wrote the code left, or just new people came in and you were trying to make them productive, or any of those things. But especially now, we live in this world where, we're all trying to figure out what, where we work and how we work with teams, because we're sort of unnaturally distributed. Sort of we've been forced to become distributed, and we now live in this world where people stay in roles shorter periods of time than they used to, and so the problems that CodeSee is trying to solve, not only were there previously, right? Like every company who's ever written code, that person at some point left, or they didn't document it well or whatever. But we're now going to kind of move into more of an age where it's like people are going to be distributed. They could be working all sorts of hours. The people they work with may change. And having tools, having visualizations, having ways to sort of better track what might have happened feels like they're going to be more important than ever.
I wholeheartedly agree. I've talked to a number of people, and we're just like you said, we're at this essentially inflection point of all of these things happening at once, and living with the problems of 50 years ago at the same time. Yeah. And so the way that we read code, the way that we understand it, and hasn't changed since punch card days. You essentially just read it line by line. You try to read the comments, and you try to discern what the mental model is of how things are working. And that visual picture just stays in your head, right? And then you don't even need to move companies. You can just move to a different part of the code base and it's completely different. Or you can just move to a different team. Or you don't even have to be on a different team, but this other team might have affected something upstream from you, and now it's breaking everything that you have. Our code bases have become 100 times more complex. We're living in this era of big code, just like big data was before, where our code bases are not getting any simpler. They're just getting more complex and more complex. And so how we understand all of the information while being able to move effectively and have more responsibilities being pushed on the developer. Like now the developer is responsible for security by design. Now this developer is responsible for DevOps. Now they're responsible for, basically like pushing and deploying all at the same time, while also trying to get that feature out so that the sales team can make their revenue numbers, right? All of this pressure, but none of the tools have evolved to meet that. And so that's what we're hoping to do, to really solve this inflection point of all of these critical things happening at once. I didn't even mention the pandemic, right? So,
Well, and that's sort of what's made us all become remote workers, whether we were that before.
Absolutely.
Or not. So let's step back a little bit. We've sort of talked about a little bit of pain points, but help me, draw a map, if you will, which is what you guys do. But kind of draw me a picture. Where does CodeSee fit? So you take a typical application development team, everything from what they do on their laptop to tools like source control or CI or what, or like where does CodeSee sort of fit into that big supply chain of tools that ultimately make software get into production and run and all those sort of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure you've heard of the term shifting left. Yep. We basically are all the way left, like -1 left before you ever write any code.
Okay.
And so what we try to do is we embed into the code base itself, into your repo, and we do all of our analysis there. And we try to give that information of understanding the code base and the connections and all of the architectural knowledge or the tribal knowledge that goes with that. And before you ever write the code. And so when you get into your editor, you've got all of this information before that to kind of inform how you write the code. And then what we do is, as you're making a PR or as you're changing the code base, we actually create a visualization on the PR automatically. So you can essentially sanity check yourself to be like, oh, is the code that I just wrote matching the mental model of how I think it's supposed to work in my head? No, you've got these extra dependencies. Oh, I should probably go fix that. Or I should probably go look at that. And then once you get your PR and once you get your change to look exactly the way that you want it to look, you essentially move into the next phase of the development cycle, which is the code review process. And now you've got this beautiful visualization, you've got this beautiful summary of the changes that you made that you can hand off to your teammate. And so your teammate doesn't have to read your PR and see the files that changed, and they then have to build up their own mental model of your change. We just hand them what the mental model is of your change on a silver platter. And that just keeps the process moving. And once you then merge that PR, then your original map, the whole code base is updated because we keep our maps completely up to date with every code review change. So the next person can then see the most up-to-date visualization when they start to make their change as well. So it's just this circular loop so that developers can be informed at every step.
Gotcha. So this is partially a kind of an individualized tool, but it also sort of inherently is sort of a team-based or a project-based tool as well. Then I guess
that's right. So like we think like you get the most value from us like when you're able to work on a team, but teams are inherently made up of individuals. They're all writing code in theory, and so that allows being able to follow a developer so that those unknown unknowns that we all deal with are at least somewhat handled is kind of our mission, to make sure that they don't feel like, hey, if I'm going to push this change, it's going to bring down my whole system. Yeah. No one likes that feeling at all.
Right. Now kind of help me walk through a little bit. So I understand this obviously from a, sort of day one greenfield project, and it kind of grows over time. But if you're somebody new to a team that's been in existence for 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever, kind of how does a tool like this, especially given your experience having worked with lots of teams in the past, like how does it tend to help that new person's learning curve to sort of go, okay, I could spend some time with somebody and we could draw out a big whiteboard of stuff. Like, does it sort of replace some of those early meetings you have where there's a massive whiteboard, or is it, kind of a different sort of learning curve that it often sort of helps them for? Like, help me with that. Like, give me the life of that sort of person coming into something that exists, but they didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually work better in the latter use case than the greenfield version, because in greenfield, if you've got one developer, then that one developer probably has everything in their heads, right? That person is probably knows how every single thing works.
Right.
It's when either the code base gets to be like a year old, or they're not working on it every day, or they go to onboard that second engineer is where our value really comes in. And so, because now you're trying to transfer information in a scalable way. And obviously our human brains can't remember everything all the time, but our code does. Our code remembers everything that we did. And what it's connected to, et cetera. So our value really comes in like after the code base is about a year old, or you've got more than 2 people on the team. We've got teams using our platform that are a founder and their first engineer. And that allows them to, sometimes all of that information doesn't get transferred to the other person. And so what if there's a dependency that you just forgot, right? And it gives you this visual picture to kind of reason about. And you can very quickly say, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you this is there because of this random reason. But now you've got the same picture, not a guess as to how the code works, that you can then actually start to communicate around. Yeah. And so we enable that to happen. And that second person doesn't necessarily have to be another engineer. It usually is, but that can be anybody. That can be product manager. That can be a designer. That can be a solutions engineer. That can be a QA person. Whenever you're trying to transfer information about the code base to someone else and pull insights out of it, that's where you can really find value with us.
Yeah. Two sort of use cases kind of jump out at me, and I'm curious if they make sense or they're sort of outside the scope of how you think about things. One of them is, obviously there's times when you're building code to sort of get something done to make something work, and then there's other times when you're going, look, I'm trying to optimize this, and obviously, as you talked about, like sometimes later in the life cycle, you'll get into those scenarios. The other one that jumps out at me is the situation in which you go, yeah, our team has been building this thing for a while, whether it's the same 10 people or people have grown. But then at some point, there's always situations in which your application, your system talks to something else and they have no idea, what you look like. I feel like right. that those sort of integrations, whether they happen like in a merger and acquisition or just 2 lines of business start talking to each other because somebody says, hey, why doesn't A talk to B? I feel like those two, and maybe even the latter one in particular, would be sort of great use cases where this could add a lot of value.
Absolutely. So we do think about both of those use cases for sure. And here, and there's actually a lot more, but here's kind of what we think about. We as an industry have treated code like this big black box, right? We built tools around, poking at the black box. We've built tools around, hey, let me know when it's angry, right? Let me know when something's happening. But I, as the human, still have to go deep diving to go and figure out like what's wrong and how to fix it. And so with CodeSee, what we're trying to do is by kind of injecting our agent or our app into the code base and visualizing how it's working and how it's changed and what's the progression looking like, we essentially are breaking open the black box and giving you visibility into the things that you weren't able to visualize before at the development level before it's in production. There are some, architectural maps that kind of show you how things are in once they're deployed. But at that point, it's too late. We need to tell the developers when they're writing the code. And so there's a whole host of use cases that become possible when you've just broken the black box open, because our whole industry is built around this big black box. I'll give you an example. You know how you can only hire so many people at a time or so many engineers at a time because you need someone to partner with them. You know how you only can, keep an engineer on this team because now they need to go learn a new part of the code base. Like all of those things become irrelevant now if they have a tool to help them onboard to the code base. You can move developers around. You can, a developer can go and explore something that they're really passionate about and get quickly up to speed. If something catastrophic happens, you can deep dive and get visibility into that almost immediately. You can, see something that you didn't know that it worked that way and prevent errors, right? Necessarily. So like, those things are now possible when you just simply break open that black box and have a way for people to understand what's happening. Most maps are most things are kind of built for debugging purposes, but not for a general understanding pedagogy.
Yeah. And I think you use the term sort of continuous understanding, which is interesting, right? Like lots of discussion about, continuous integration, continuous development. But I mean, it's essentially it's the old joke. It's, sort of like a murder mystery and you're trying to figure out what's going on. And I mean, the more I can imagine, there are probably some people in groups who, are kind of like, I don't know that I necessarily want you to know what we've been doing over here. But it is, like you said, it's having just having the ability to sort of, break open that black box is super important, because at some point somebody's responsible for the thing working, the thing meeting goals, the thing being performant, and you want that ability to say, hey, sometimes having more eyes on this is really, really valuable.
Yeah, I mean, we all know how it feels to get pinged in the middle of the night, right? And we're kind of talking about these terms as just-in-time understanding versus continuous understanding. And just-in-time understanding is what we all do today, which is like, I just need to know just enough to get my job done and nothing else, because there's simply no time to go and learn everything else with all of the other responsibilities that we have. And so providing an easy way to grasp information, continuously kind of reinforcing how the model is working, even as the code base literally changes from under you, it is kind of a much better model. And we've put in a lot of guardrails to like try to not give you too much information and not to overwhelm you, but give you the right information at the right time continuously, so that you feel confident that there's not something that you missed, or some other thing that's this ticking time bomb that's kind of lurking down that we're all trying to avoid.
More and more our software is pretty connected to, not just it running, but lots of other things. How do you think about, how does CodeSee as a whole think about how to integrate, right? Because integrations are great, but but they can be overwhelming at the same time. Like, what are some of the things that you've sort of, focused on early on, prioritized in terms of where you integrate into the rest of the workflows that people have, right? Like you said, you're sort of -1 in terms of shift left, but do you integrate with 0 and 1, or, like how do you think about that?
Yeah, very much so. So we integrate within in your editor, but we also our -1, so to say, is kind of integrated directly into your repo.
Okay.
So we just provide all of this information. Essentially, it's a GitHub app. One way that we deliver it is via a GitHub app.
Okay.
We'll have more code hosts in the future to essentially analyze within about 10 clicks. So you go for GitHub Marketplace, you kind of go down the permissions and you add an API key, and in about maybe 10 or 11 clicks, we start analyzing your code base all through aggregate data. We don't store any of the code at this time. And so we can then provide that information immediately. And so we have a visual tool that you can just look at on the web or look at in your browser, and that you can share with your teammates. Your chief architect can start looking at things and start sharing with other team members. And then we bring that directly down into the editor so that as your developers are writing code, they can also use that map there. And then we integrate directly into the pull request. As early as when you make a draft pull request, we automatically create a visualization on a PR automatically without having to do anything. And those visualizations are interactive, and you can complete the code review right there the same way you would in GitHub. But it provides you an extra logical groupings of how to do a code review, et cetera, all right there in the same way that you would develop today.
Yeah, very cool. Very, very cool. What, I guess, in simplest terms, how do people measure the value, the increased productivity, the learning curve that they get out of CodeSee? Is there sort of words and numbers that sort of fit in terms of measuring where you create simplicity or where you help folks?
Yeah. So we're still figuring out the actual multipliers with some of our enterprise customers, but where you really see value really quickly is around how things actually are connected, where things are, and you can actually. If you think about our maps and review maps, they're in 2 layers, essentially. One layer is connected directly to the code, so you always have the source of truth. And you don't actually have to spend any time diving to double check that the code actually works the way that it does, so you save time there. And the second layer has all of the architecture or tribal knowledge on top of the code that persists even as the code changes. So you can create visual walkthroughs, you can create labels and colors and segment things, you can create really focused maps, or you can create really broad ones. And so that instantaneously allows a developer to see, I can get an instant walkthrough of the code. And we also have this final part that's called automatic insights. And so as a first-time developer in this code base, you can see here's the number of files that are changed and where all the hotspots are, the fastest change. You can instantly see those with just a toggle of a button. So all of the time that you would go to figure out where do I start, it's just completely wiped out. And on the backside, we also see value with, hey, you've got this company that probably has competitors, probably are trying to ship value, probably trying to, get something done in the world. And time is of the essence, right? And we see a lot of value by leaders being able to finally give developers the right tools that they need to make their lives easier. And if you can make their day-to-day experience easier with navigating and understanding and trying to do all of those things, you see a lot of productivity and developer happiness that is increased, because you're not saying, hey, you still need to get this thing done in, X amount of time, but I'm not going to give you the tools to do it.
Nice.
And so that's really where we're seeing the power.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, let me wrap up with one last question for you.
Sure.
If folks are listening to this, they're going, look, we have those problems. We haven't found a great way to fix that. What's the best way to get started with CodeSee? Is it something they download like locally? Is it a SaaS service? What's kind of the best way to get engaged and get started?
Yeah. So right now it's a SaaS service, but in probably another day or two, they'll be able to use our VS Code extension. We've got it in private now, but you can just email me or go to our homepage, CodeSee.io. And if you're interested in using it for your company, you can chat instantly with us. You'll get, most times, either me or one of my folks will be around at most hours of the day, just talking to folks who want to use this at their company. So you can feel free to just chat with us.
Yeah, very cool. Very, very cool. Good stuff. So we, as I mentioned in the beginning, like we love sort of this intersection of, making developers more productive, startups that are, especially startups that come from backgrounds in which you used to live with the problem, you created some ways around it, and then all of a sudden you said, I need to bring this to the rest of the world. So it's been very, very cool kind of hearing your story and sort of walking through your experience of how you brought CodeSee out from your learnings previously. So thank you for that. We really appreciate the time.
Awesome. I'm so glad.
Yeah, no, it's been really good. Folks, with that, I want to thank Shanea for her time, for educating us a little bit. And, as always, folks, we want to thank you for telling a friend about the show, helping us grow the community, giving us feedback on all the different ways that you listen to your podcast player. And I think with that, we're going to wrap it up. Hope everybody had a good holiday. And with that, we'll wrap it up and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.